This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello. This is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks, events, happenings in the world of politics, though we try to stay away from politics. Recently, it's become such an incendiary topic, but because it's often a provoker, it's something that we need to deal with in the context of this show. But lots of other things too: technology, science, which we're going to talk about today, wellness issues, because I feel that knowing how to deal with all of the information that is coming at us through our various media, and knowing how to deal with it in a healthy way is crucially important. So the process here is to take a step back and look at all of these things from a higher perspective, with an understanding, or perhaps if there's not an understanding of it yet for you, perhaps an imagining that, let's put it this way. What if we exist at another level entirely, a higher level, and that what we do on a daily basis in our little flesh pot bodies is simply our own creation, kind of a hologram, if you will, or a virtual reality experience in which we are playing through different scenarios with different sets of rules and ways of going about things, and we're doing it for the experiences and for ultimately the remembrance of who and what we really are, and the joy of the experiences. So that when we view these things that from our smaller self, if you will, our avatars, seem overwhelming and monumental and disturbing and almost, for some people, apocalyptic. When you take that step back, when you use that, and if you have to use it as an imagining tool, if we take that step back, it's much more empowering. We can see that these things are not as in control of our lives as we might think they are, or give them the power to be. So we go in, we recognize the truth of it, how we've created it, and we take the energy from it if it's something that's disturbing. If it's something that's not disturbing, the things that you've created in your life that you absolutely enjoy, then you give more energy to that. You focus on that. You appreciate what you have created, even if you feel like you had no part in creating it whatsoever. You did, but not on maybe the level that you're aware of. And this is an empowering tool to deal with both ends of the spectrum. Hence the title of this week's episode, Are We Ourselves? Because I had a message from a listener who heard what I said last week when I, as I usually do at the top of the program, talk about a little bit about my perspective on things and how we exist on different. And basically the question was, if we're not ourselves, who are we? Which I thought was an excellent question. So just to clarify what my perspective is on it, there's the small self, if you will, for lack of a better term, or you can think of it as your flesh avatar, if you will, that is going through life, sometimes feeling like they're struggling, sometimes feeling like they're successful, sometimes feeling like everything is going wrong, sometimes finding the light in certain things, feeling limited, scared sometimes, elated and joyful other times. And then you have the big self, the higher self, who is beyond all of that, who is essentially connected with all other higher selves, and is creating all of these experiences, is behind all of this, is behind small self. But our awareness as small self, our awareness of big self, can be murky, or in some cases non-existent. However, we have ways through these holograms, if you will, through these virtual reality scenarios, of reconnecting with that higher self and gaining an understanding that sort of transcends what appears to be going on in your immediate environment. So there's that sense. And then the small self also has its own trajectory of things, such as the search for yourself. Who am I? The search for your authentic self. That's another kind of virtual reality game that's set in motion by higher self, big self, as part of this game of feeling confused and not knowing who you really are. You do, but for the moment, for the purposes of the game, you've forgotten. And so that sets in motion a lot of different experiences that you can have. So that's my perspective on it. I know it often feels overwhelming when you're faced with stories and these situations that seem so terrifying, and these political machinations that seem so bizarre. It's easy to lose sight of it. I do it all the time. That's why I do this show, to remind me. Because I need it. And hopefully, if there's others listening and it helps, well, I'm happy to add to that. So today's show is going to be about, we're actually going to do meditation on the authentic self. But we're also going to talk about how we sort of find ourselves in a different place. If you've ever felt like, well, you've heard the phrase, I'm not feeling myself today. If you've ever felt like you're in a place in your life and you just don't know who and what you are, or what's really going on, or you just feel like everything familiar to you has changed, it can be a scary feeling. So that's why I'm going to do that authentic self meditation, but also wanted to talk about another thing that I mentioned last week that got some response, was living in the mystery. How do we do that? Well, we already are. That much is no mystery. We already are living in the mystery. You can't not, because just living is living in the mystery. Where we get confused and where we have a lot of illusions going on is the idea that we know stuff. The science and scientific method has taken great strides and takes great pride in breaking things down and thinking that they know stuff. And science does know stuff, absolutely. And important stuff, and handy stuff. Stuff that works within a limited framework. Sometimes. But with the new models that are coming out, through the understandings that we now have of quantum physics, where we now understand that our world is not so much an atomistic world, where everything is parts of everything that fit together, but an energetic world. It depends on energy. And what you give your energy to creates. We now know that what the observer observes is affected by the observer. So when you have that, and you understand that that's what happens, that your very observation of something affects something, has changes to something, it brings a whole set of problems to what most people consider to be the scientific method. Watching observable, objective facts. Because really, when you break it down and you think about what quantum physics is really saying, there isn't any. We're all creating it. So when you do an experiment and you get a certain result, that result is partly because that's what you've created. Now, one of the big topics about, in science, when you do these experiments and you do your research, is, are the results of the research, are the results of the experiment replicable? In other words, if another set of scientists do the same experiment, following the same patterns, the same method, do they get the same or similar results? And a lot of what scientists consider to be scientific validity depends on whether those experiments can be replicated in other arenas. And sometimes they are. And sometimes the results are similar enough that they meet that criteria. But I think every scientist understands that no research experiment is ever the results are always different, because the results depend on the observer, and that is always going to change things. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying that you throw out the entire scientific method, but I think some very radical changes in perspective need to be, begun here, and I'm not seeing that happen. I'm seeing scientists holding on to this old model that clearly has been shown that it's not effective. So that the answers that you're getting may be the answers you're comfortable with, or the answers that you even want, or maybe if they're not the answers you expect or want, that they're at least you're comfortable with how they came to that conclusion. It just may not be the truth.